Good morning, everyone, and welcome to MSBA's Coffee and Conversations series that we are continuing this year. And with this series, we are bringing together Maryland leaders, elected officials, and you as our MSBA members, so we can learn about key priorities, challenges, and advocacy opportunities for our profession. And this is a continuation of these connections that we want to maintain from our association. We recently conducted interviews with candidates for office. We connected with 25 candidates for the offices of governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and comptroller. And we have prior discussions from Coffee and Conversations, which are available on our advocacy website, where we've connected with legislators in the past. And this year, we're really trying to make sure that we're branching out that focus, not only to talk to legislators, but also their support staff, judiciary partners. Today, we'll hear from the executive branch, as well as newly elected officials across the state. And you can tune in the mornings live like you're doing today. You can also see this information on demand on our website. It'll also be available on our YouTube channel. And like I said, you can see all of our prior conversations. If you have any questions today, please post them here in the chat, and we will make sure that those are addressed by our guest today. Our host today is former State Senator Bobby Zirkin, who works with us on our advocacy efforts, and I'll turn it over to him. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Shally, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be back with some coffee with conversation. Today, I'm honored to be here with Chris Mincher, who is the Chief Legal Counsel for outgoing Governor Larry Hogan. This is a different type of a coffee with conversation than we've had. We usually are with legislators talking policy. This is executive branch and talking more about the law and how Chris's office interplays with the Attorney General, with the executive branch, and so on. So, Chris, great to be here with you, and thanks for joining with us.
Thank you very much for having me. It'll be I know there's only a couple months left, but I appreciate the chance to come on and sort of explain the office, and we'll see what it looks like in a few months' time. But I appreciate the chance to be here.
Well, it's great to see you, and let's dive right into it, because this is for the Maryland State Bar Association with its tens of thousands of members across the state, and I think many of them probably don't know a lot about what your office does. So let's start there. What does the governor's chief legal office do, and what do you do for the governor, and what's the day-to-day operation look like?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, we're a legal office. I mean, we're lawyers here doing legal work. We don't have our law degrees and actually do policy or political work. We provide legal services. The entire office of the governor are our clients, which can range anywhere from 70 to 100 people. Obviously, the governor, lieutenant governor, and the sort of senior staff, but everybody else in the support network in the office of the governor. There's different categories of things that we handle. The first and foremost, we provide legal advice. A lot of times this will be about the governor's constitutional and statutory powers and how he can use those, and we stay up on that. But really, if it's anything in the code involving a legal issue that may come up, we always have to be prepared to be able to opine on it. Obviously, the executive branch agencies are going to be staffed with assistant attorneys general who will be doing agency work. But when issues come up, we have to be very much generalists in terms of being able to kind of dive into anything that might require a legal opinion coming up from anywhere in the code. So that's the first thing that we do. I mean, sort of a corollary to that is that we help draft executive orders, which is an extension of how the governor exercises his power sometimes. I mean, those have to be drafted in line with various legal principles about the exercise of that power. And so we will draft those in this office. We, as many people will know, our office has a role in judicial appointments. We receive the information and nominees from the judicial nominating commissions, and we compile more information, do some further investigation, get all those materials together, then present them to the governor so that he can make his appointments, and the chief counsel will sit in on those interviews with the candidates as well. Governor's clemency powers, commutations, and pardons. We get those requests. We work with the parole commission so that when people make a request for a pardon or a commutation, we assign it out for investigation to collect more information on it. We then compile all that, present that to the governor so he can make decisions about pardons and commutations. And I'm trying to think about some other Public Information Act requests. We handle those. Those are requests for public records from the governor's office. We're not the public record shop for the entire state of Maryland or for all the executive branch. It's very much just the records of the governor's office, but a lot of people would like to see those and make requests. So those are the day-to-day things that we deal with. During session, we don't do bill review on everything that comes through. Our role is really limited to if there's a legal question about a bill, like is it constitutional? Are there constitutional concerns, or are there federalism concerns? Does this violate federal law? If there's a possible legal problem with a bill, then we will take a look at it. If there's a veto, that's going to be vetoed not on policy matters, but on like a legal ground, a constitutional ground, or something like that, then we might have a role in helping draft the language of a veto letter. As for policy, not too much. I mean, we might be asked to kind of weigh in on bills involving the judiciary, or the governor's exercise of his powers, or something that impacts the legal profession. We may be consulted on those things on a policy ground, but for the most part, all the policy questions are going to be handled by our legislative office. And if it's a criminal justice issue, it might come through the governor's office of crime prevention. So sorry for the long-winded answer there, but it's a lot. We do a lot.
Not at all. No, that's a great introduction. I want to dive into some of those things in with some specificity if we could. But before we do that, for those who don't know you, even though you've got 2 more months in this job, 2.5 months before, well, assuming the new administration doesn't keep you along, or you want to stay. How did you get to this job? Like, what was your background that brought you to where you are right now?
Sure. I think just like everyone, it's the weird twists and turns. I mean, this is not a job I ever saw myself ending up in. I don't know how anyone would see themselves ending up in a job like this, because it's such a lightning strike to get a role like this. And but I graduated. I graduated law school in 2011. Okay. Not a great economy at the time, not a lot of jobs out there. It was in the middle of the recession. There was just not a lot of early hiring. I was fortunate enough to take a fellowship from the law school, and I was able to turn that into a chance to join the chambers of Judge Ben Legg at the federal court. And I was there for I think like not too long, 6 months or so, maybe 7, when Judge Robert McDonald got appointed to the Court of Appeals and was looking for new clerks. And so it was a chance for me to have had some experience doing some clerking on a trial court and federally, and come over and do appellate work on the state side. Jumped at that opportunity. Both of them were wonderful experiences, really kind of set the tone, shaped my career. Still to this day, I think back to the skills and experiences I had then, and how they've informed how I've done my job since. I was there for a year and a half. Then I joined a Baltimore firm, Silverman Thompson, Suck and White. Was an associate there. Did a whole lot of different types of litigation, everything across the board. I mean, that was what's fun about that place, was that it had anything you could name seemed to go through there. So you could do a lot of different types of litigation. And what happened was that, a guy kind of up the ladder there at the firm. Now the admin judge for the Baltimore City District Court, Jeff Henger. He had come over when Governor Hogan got elected and had been a deputy here. And so I had known him from the firm. And when his co-deputy, who's now Anne Arundel County Circuit Court Judge Mark Crooks, got appointed to that court, there was an opening. And I love politics. I find it very interesting. I've always loved politics, but I would not say I was a politically connected guy. I didn't travel in the circles. I wasn't a frequent guy at fundraisers or so I was pretty surprised when Jeff gave me a call and wanted to know if I'd be interested in putting in for that position that was being vacated by now Judge Crooks. I was sort of surprised that they would even want to talk to me. I thought these were insider positions that went to really connected people, but I was extremely fortunate and was able to come in, and I've been here for 6 years since. I've loved every minute of it. So
it's great. One general question, then before we talk about some of the more specific things, so the assistant attorney generals, which you referenced before, obviously they're involved in all the executive branches. They also have, when bills get introduced, they provide legal counsel. I guess what's the interplay between your office and the attorney general's office, and as a practical matter, what happens when you disagree on things? Because there obviously I remember there was some legislation about when the attorney general could get involved. There was some legislation a few years ago that was pretty tense on that issue. But putting that aside, what happens when there's difference of opinion between the two offices, and how do you either work with or not work with the attorney general's office?
It's a great question. And, obviously, the governor's office and the attorney general's office are not always on the same page about every issue. There's no surprise there. I wouldn't be surprised if even when they're of the same party, past and in the future, that there's going to be times where different elected officials are not going to have the same view on something. And sometimes, all you can do is agree to disagree, and that's entirely appropriate. There's no requirement that everyone has to agree on every single thing. And sometimes that means that the courts have to step in and resolve something. And sometimes it means that it's left to the political realm or the court of public opinion, and that's fine too. But those instances are rare. It's the vast majority of times behind the scenes where there is a disagreement between the governor's office and the attorney general's office. It has to get worked out, and that's a quality that I think anybody who comes into this office in a few months' time is going to have, which is the ability. And we've actually had very, very strong working relationships with the attorney general's office, in that you have to negotiate and compromise, and you have to get to a solution that works for everybody. A lot of times, getting into that, you can make your legal arguments, but it's not going to be clear cut. There's not going to be an on point legal authority that's going to say who's right and who's wrong. And the reality is that our office is going to be relying. I mean, they've got 400 some attorneys over there who all have expertise in all these things, and we need their feedback and input, and to have conversations with them day to day about all kinds of issues in state government. And we can't have an acrimonious relationship with the attorney general's office. So you really do have to be open for compromise, cooperation, discussion. Otherwise, if you're being stubborn and fighting all the time, you tie up resources, you waste time, and you sort of put the state in gridlock, and nobody wants that. The citizens don't want that. So I think the best answer I'll give you is we work it out most times. We figure something out that works for everybody, and sometimes you can't, and that's fine too. And then the courts will give us an answer, or we just let the dispute stay out there in the political or public realm.
So one of the bigger issues of the last year, I thought was going to head its way up to the courts in a way that might separate the executive branch and the Attorney General's office, and it didn't really play out that way, but was redistricting. And it turned out, everything kind of worked out, and fairly easily. Although you probably may have a disagreement with that characterization. I guess as a hypothetical, though, because I am interested in kind of the two different roles. What if a situation, before we actually talk about what actually happened, because I think that's fascinating, but what if the governor's office had taken a more hard line on, redistricting, promoting the idea of, let's say that all the House of Delegate members had to come from single districts, which, obviously that was not what he had promoted or his commission had promoted, and that the legislature was in a completely different direction. And who represents if that kind of an issue made its way up to the Court of Appeals, how does it work between the Attorney General's office, who represents the governor, I think, and you guys who represent, how does that all work out if that type of a high profile case had made its way up to the courts?
Right. The Attorney General's office, I think, would agree that they have to represent everybody, and they have to represent offices that are not always on the same page, or sometimes diametrically opposed. And they themselves have had internal processes of trying to deal with that. Sometimes they have some lawyers that get assigned to work with, one elected official or one office or one branch, and others who work for others. And, sometimes they hire outside counsel to step in and represent somebody because they feel that their representation of the other state actors is not compatible. And the Attorney General's office, there's room for debate, I'll say, in terms of how much they're allowed to pick and choose where they decide to put their resources or take a public stance as an attorney for the state. In this instance, the Attorney General's office has to represent the governor and the General Assembly. They would have to do both. They are going to have internal legal conclusions or positions that they reach that they are likely to advocate. They're not always right. They have very good, smart people over there who we very much respect, and they do a good job. But sometimes they're wrong. All you have to do is flip through appellate opinions to see where they're sometimes on the losing side. Practically, we have been able to work out representation issues when there are, sort of completely incompatible positions being taken. In this instance, in the redistricting context, I'm not sure we got there because the constitutional process for the roles of the governor and the General Assembly are pretty plainly set out. And actually, we were staffed by our planning department, and the assistant attorneys general at the planning department, played a role in assisting our Citizens Redistricting Commission, which was the governor's, that was his solution to exercising his power to submit the maps, the original maps, and our office created a executive order establishing that and assisted that. And so, the agency personnel did their job of assisting and helping a duly and legally created entity by the governor to create maps. We then gave those to the legislature and fulfilled our role there, and they then picked up the role of representing the legislature in taking it through their legislative process. So there was a little more of a clean split of duties and authorities there, but it's not always going to be the case. And there's a lot of open questions. I can tell you, there's a lot of open questions about how do two branches, when they feel very strongly that they have good legal grounds, but are butting heads, how the Attorney General navigates that.
Interesting. Did you play a role in that, or was your role just giving legal guidance from the executive branch and then handing it over to the General Assembly? Was that kind of
we certainly, this goes back to the the 6th congressional district after the lawsuit. For those who don't know, there was the past decade, there has been litigation about redistricting across the country, but also here in Maryland. And there was a challenge to the 6th district that made its way through the federal courts up and down. It lasted years. And there came a time where the maps were thrown out. And so the governor experimented with a citizens redistricting commission made up of appointed citizens that come in and redraw the maps. And so we started with that commission, and that then turned into the larger citizens redistricting commission for the whole redistricting effort in 2020. And we drafted those executive orders and advised on that process and helped create that process with others in the governor's office. And so we had a lot of involvement in creating that and getting that to work. And so our office definitely had a role in redistricting all the way through the point where it got sent over to the General Assembly. At that point, we certainly followed the litigation. We developed a little bit of expertise on redistricting matters and working on it here for so long, and we certainly had our opinions about that litigation and the arguments being made, but there wasn't a formal role for us at that point.
Interesting. All right, let's switch to a different topic, and one that I don't know if I would say that it's over, but it's certainly, at least it's different now than it was a few years ago. And that was, you were involved, your office was involved during the heart of COVID, and all the executive orders that were coming out, and all of this kind of new area of law that nobody had experienced in their lives. Like, can you just kind of walk through what that was like and kind of your office's role? I know that's a very broad question, but some of the things that you found yourself involved in when dealing with executive orders in the COVID crisis.
Sure. Man, I'm gonna have PTSD talking about it. It was such a crazy time. First, I want to mention the chief counsel at the time for that process, Mike Padone, who really was the field general on those types of things, and dealt with that from start to finish, and did an incredible job. Most people don't know he only started here a few weeks before COVID hit. And at the time I was a deputy, I was the only deputy in the office. And so this hit, and it was a brand new boss, and and because our office drafted executive orders, the sort of because we had to sort of prepare on the governor's emergency powers and constitutional limits on it, and statutorily what he was authorized to do, just a lot of the COVID, the implementing of the COVID policies had to come through us to make sure it was legal and that we were comfortable with it legally, and then also implementing it by drafting the emergency orders that came down. It was, we weren't policymakers in this office, but us having knowledge of the governor's emergency powers, what was out of bounds, what was permissible, what we could do, what we couldn't do, best practices for how you draft that and implement that. We had to be involved in pretty much all the major discussions of all the stakeholders and policymakers and people in the governor's office and at the agencies who wanted to see things go into effect to keep society functional. It was a very panicked time. There was very, very long days. We were often drafting emergency orders with very short turnaround time about issues of which we had very little prior knowledge. So we would have, large and long discussions with various stakeholders, both in and out of government, as well as our agency experts and people who are making recommendations. Very, very long hours, and of course, we're all with families who are now have kids home from school, and if anyone could have seen how I was working at this time, my kids were in the basement being half babysat by the television or trying to do kindergarten on their computer at the same time that, I'm in the guest bedroom, putting in order that's drastically changing 30 years of a statutory law. It was a very hectic and looking back, almost sort of comical situation. My kids are throwing toys in through the doorway at me while I'm sitting there trying to do these things. But it was I think it was about 5-6 weeks later, we added another deputy, Kunle Adeyemo, who's now our Governor's Office of Crime Prevention Executive Director. And he was able to dive in and really help relieve some of the pressure. At the beginning of 2021, we added Stephanie Megan, who's now on the Board of Contract Appeals, and so that helped as well. But it was a really a crazy team effort from the legal office, with us all largely working remotely, and we barely even met each other. Kunle and I had maybe seen each other once or twice before we had to be on the phone dealing with these issues so much. But it was no one in law school prepares you for using powers to rewrite statutes, temporarily, of course, and within constitutional bounds that you always have to be aware of and always respect, and realize that there are some rights and liberties we have that it does not matter what the emergency is, they need to be respected at all times. And so, being aware of those legal limits. But it's I'll never forget it. And I'm not sure there's a way to prepare any lawyer for having those types of responsibilities.
Just a question on that, just from a general standpoint, did policy implications or thoughts come into play, or is it really just strictly from your office's standpoint, here's the law, here's what we can do within the bounds of it? Or, I guess it's a very broad question on every issue you deal with, but how does the political ramifications or kind of political pressures play into particularly something like the COVID executive orders, where there was so much pressure from different groups to do different things? Or does that, you kind of have to drown out that noise?
You do the best you can. I mean, when people realize that you're the ones actually putting the pen to the paper and drafting the things, then they see you as a point to try to get the thing that they want in there. And so they're going to reach out. And one thing I'll credit Mike Bedone for doing was instilling in us an aspect of constituent service here. People were really scared. I mean, I know we're thinking of like industries jumping in to lobby for something to help it, but that's only a part of the types of calls we got. I mean, a lot of them, we were getting calls from mom and pop businesses that were terrified, and parents with kids that couldn't get into childcare. I mean, people didn't know who to call or who to talk to, and people would just look online, Legal Counsel's office. And so in the crush of drafting and dealing with these things, you're getting phone calls from just citizens who are scared and don't know who else to call. I credit Mike for really encouraging us to pick up the phone, try to reassure them, take a message, pass it along to whoever can get back to them. But as to policy and politics and people, during the crafting of the COVID measures, we have policy experts, in the governor's office on everything that oversee agencies that have them in their portfolios. We have policy experts at the agencies themselves. We did not carry the idea that we were experts in the legal office on everything under the sun. So we made sure that policy questions got directed to where they were supposed to go. But that doesn't mean that we didn't hear from everybody. It was everybody sort of honed in on this office as the final place where they could kind of make their pitch.
Right. Interesting. That we could do an entire conversation about the different experiences with that, and they still go on. It's not done. So it's be interesting to see how things are handled moving forward. But
Right.
Let me switch, because one of the things you did bring up, and I want to be mindful of your time. But one of the things you did bring up, and I know is important to the members of MSBA, or judicial appointments. And how does that process? There are some who are deeply involved in it. There are some who, want to help their friend become a judge, or want to become a judge themselves. We have a very convoluted process where district court and court of special appeals and appeals don't run, and the circuit courts do run for elections. I guess, what is your office's role in that? And I guess for members, how can they be most effective, at least if we're continuing that process the way it is right now?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the appointments process. I mean, it's a big part of what we do. The governor is coming up on 200 appointments. He's interviewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of candidates. It's constantly going. There's constantly openings, and I'll just say on the front end, how proud I am to work for a governor who takes that process so seriously. You really don't know coming in what that process is going to look like, and you're scared. I mean, well, I don't know about scared, but a lot of people out there, when it comes to judicial appointments, they want to grumble and say, "Oh, it's all political, it's all connection, somebody," and then you end up with. But I was so pleased to come in and find just how much more pure the process was than people would imagine. It's a very robust process that the governor is very involved in, and he really does take into account all the candidates. He reads the materials and the information. So our office is just to prepare him for that part of that process, which is that we get from the judicial nominating commissions the nominees, and we get all the information that they have. So we get all the letters of recommendation, all the bar association rankings and recommendations, all that comes into our office. We then from there will undertake some additional investigation, or things continue to come in, and we continue to get input, and we'll make phone calls to judges on the bench, to local leaders in law, such as state's attorneys, the district public defenders, the county attorneys. So we just continue to add to the information that we already have. We then prepare those for the governor, who will do the interviews. The chief counsel will sit in on those interviews. So it's an extension of the process that already exists. When we get all the applications, we read all those. So it's important, and it takes a lot of time. Your question as to what can MSBA do to play a role in that. A lot of bar associations actually have questions like that because they participate in the judicial nominating commission process, and they do interviews themselves. They submit their rankings, they submit their comments, and then if the nominees aren't exactly what they wanted, or the appointments aren't in line, then they're wondering what went wrong. I guess what I'll say to any bar association, MSBA included, is that there's nothing to stop any bar association from reaching out to the governor's office after the nominees and kind of putting their information and process back on the table. We can get almost no bar association usually sends us letters with the nominees explaining, here's how we rank them, here's what our members said, here's what we learned. Our office is always welcomes phone calls and meetings if people want to talk through these types of issues and provide information. So there's a second level there at the governor's office beyond the judicial nominating commission that is available if any bar association feels strongly that they have a very robust process and that they have good recommendations and input to share, then that's a step that remains there. I'm not saying this about MSBA because I don't have any information that would apply, but just in general for all bar associations, I would recommend that make sure it's an objective process. Some bar associations, when you look at their rankings, it seems, through the years, when you get a lot of experience with it, it seems that they are focused on promoting leadership who wants to be on the bench, various people who are heavily involved in the bar association want to get on, and so the recommendations are heavy in that person's favor and not so much for anybody else. And it starts to look a little bit more like self-interest or just not as objective, and that just makes the recommendations a little less useful. But my understanding is that MSBA has a very robust and objective process, and I do know some of the people who are involved in that process, and I have no reason to think that they're not running an absolutely very informative and thorough process. And so I don't want to speak for the next counsel's office that comes in, but I would encourage MSBA to keep that process and that results at the forefront all the way from start to finish, not just at the JNC level.
Okay, that's very helpful. Let me ask you this. I did want to, and I don't want you to opine if you don't want to, on the policy decisions that are being discussed. It's something that was of interest to me, as we talked about offline when I was in the Senate. But Judge Dumais, I think, is leading, or one of the chairs of a work group looking at the system. I guess my question to you is, if you can, do you think the system works? There are those in the General Assembly, I know it's a policy call, but there are those in the General Assembly who think we should do away with circuit court judicial elections. There are some who think the process works great and they should have some tie-in to the public. And then there's the whole issue of how we do the elections if we're going to keep them. Any thoughts on that, or you want to leave that for the policy folks?
I'm very interested in Judge Dumais' commission and what they're doing, and I'm interested to see that there is a very thorough look at different options. It's not just whether or not we do away with them or keep them, because there are a lot of different options of middle ground you could take. I mean, a lot of different ideas out there, which I think are interesting and neat to explore. There's different types of elections you can have. You can have retention elections. Some states identify the incumbents or the sitting judges on ballots. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways that you can approach the issue to try to reach a compromise between people who think that the elections have value and don't. I guess the only thing I'll add is that the governor's office has always supported our circuit court appointees. I think for good reason. We have a very strong process that results in good candidates, and I think we're disappointed when in those few instances where the circuit court appointees have lost elections, and we feel that the citizens, it's a shame that they've been deprived of the services of those judges, and it's a very hard thing to ask someone who's interested in being a judge. We know this from the judicial appointments process sometimes, because there hardly anybody applies to circuit court. I don't think that's a well-known fact. I think anybody can see the judicial applicants on the web, and sometimes circuit court, that's a very important job. I mean, that's a job that I think a lot of people would aspire to. And it's so critically important, and yet hardly anybody applies. And I think it's the fear of having to be a politician, the fear of having to go through a campaign that's not anybody's forte. They might not know where to get the funds for that from. They might not know how to, and so it's certainly having an effect in terms of keeping otherwise qualified people from seeking those positions in the first place. And then it's certainly disappointing when very qualified people who have done a very good job on the bench, essentially have their whole career upended. They come in for a year and a half, they put away their practice, they leave their whole career track. And then all of a sudden they're back out with nothing again after a year of good service, doing well by the citizens. So that's certainly not a process that seems to work. So I don't have a hard and firm policy view on this that I'd like to share, but I'm very interested in Judge Dumay's work, and I'm very interested to see what the commission comes up with.
Interesting. That it's been perennial. I mean, just an issue that the General Assembly has probably wrestled with every single year since at least I was there in the late 90s. So it'll be interesting to see if something new comes out of this.
Right.
Again, I'm looking and I see we're short on time, but you brought up an issue which, I guess I really hadn't thought through, that your office was involved in. The General Assembly has gotten involved on issues of, not obviously of pardons or clemency, but have taken to insert themselves a little bit more on those types of issues, for better or for worse. So not asking you to not asking you to opine on their policy choices, but how does your office, that's got to be a pretty significant and important role that your office plays, is in dealing with what I would imagine are lots of individuals who are looking for clemency and pardons. How does your office deal with that, and what's been your experience with that through Governor Hogan?
Yeah, it used to be a lot more work, because I'm sure as a lot of people know that for a good portion of the administration, the governor had the final say on rules of those with life sentences. And again, as I'll say with the judicial appointments, you're dealing with case-by-case basis here, a lot of information gathering, a lot of investigation, putting those together for a decision, and decisions that were taken seriously. And a lot of time and attention was poured on making those decisions. As you pointed, the General Assembly has taken that power away from the governor, and now the parole commission's decisions are the final decisions made there. We still deal with medical paroles of people with life sentences. That was not wrapped into that, so we'll still get requests for medical parole that come through the parole commission for those with life sentences, and we still get a variety of commutation requests. A commutation, just to explain for everybody out there, I mean, there's actually a lot of confusion between parole and commutation and pardon. The quick way I'll explain it is a parole is a statutory process where you get a sentence, but you have the ability for parole, which is if you hit certain benchmarks and are acceptable to the parole commission, then as part of your sentence, you can get released at an earlier time. A commutation is asking the governor to use his constitutional power to actually shorten a sentence. So one big example is people with life sentences who are sentenced to life without parole, meaning that they are necessarily going to be in prison for their lives, may ask for a commutation that is shortened to life with parole, so that they have a chance to go to the parole commission and ask for a shorter sentence. I mean, that's an example, but I mean, if someone is sentenced to 30 years and is served 15 and they want a commutation to reduce their sentence, that's what a commutation would be. And a pardon is basically getting rid of all the negative effects of a conviction. I think people generally, understand what a pardon is. We do get a lot of pardon requests. We have a process for all these things. So when people request a commutation or a pardon, there are investigators at the agency level that will look into it, gather information. We can get obviously prison records and go out in the community and talk to victims and talk to relatives of the offender. We get information from a bunch of different places before a decision is made. The pardon process actually has an application that you fill out that goes to the parole commission. They will look at it. They'll make a recommendation. So by the time it's coming to us, we've got it investigated with a full report, with the application, with the parole commission's recommendation on it. So it's a very thorough process. People don't realize that. I think they think these things are, again, just sort of handed out based on whatever criteria, but it really comes to us with a lot of information for a decision. So I don't know that the General Assembly can really insert themselves into the pardon or commutation process. Those are constitutional powers.
Right.
But certainly on parole, they've had difference of opinion about who should be exercising those.
Right.
Those are not issues that our office deals with as much as we used to.
Interesting. Yeah, is that a pretty significant part of your workload? I mean, it would seem that that's a lot of individuals who may or may not be looking for those things. Is that
There's a lot. I mean, it's kind of one of the, I don't want to call it busy work because it's very important, but it's also very behind the scenes. I mean, I don't think people realize that, that people are used to some elected official like unloading hundreds of pardons on like the last day in office, but that's not how things are being done here. I mean, this has been a constant sort of process of getting them in, making decisions on them. I think it's interesting for people to know what it is that gets pardoned through this process, which is, this is by and large people who have something in their background. Maybe it was, a dumb thing they did in their youth, or, a true mistake that they had, or a momentary lapse in judgment. And since then, they've been able to show that they are upstanding member of the community. They've had a nice, stable, productive lifestyle. They've contributed to society. They've contributed to the community. This is holding them back from some employment thing they want to obtain, or they want to be able to get it expunged, and they just need a little help to recover from a mistake that was made a while ago, and they can show how reformed they've been, since that time. And those are the people who are going to be considered and get pardons in the meantime. There are, sort of flashy headliner pardons for people who have been declared innocent by the courts, or there's, and they want a pardon to be able to seek compensation for erroneous conviction. I mean, these are very much in the news, and those are taken on a case-by-case basis. They're a lot more rare, and of course, that will look at the state's attorney's opinion of the case, and look at the case. That's going to depend on what the judges in the courts that have dealt with it have felt that the evidence shows, and what they've ruled on. So those are, much more of the flashy ones, but those are very rare, and that's not generally what I'm talking about when I'm talking about pardons. It's going to be much more, average citizens from all over the state filling out applications, sending it in, crossing their fingers with a prayer, and then if they can really show that they've been good citizens for a while, they'll have that chance.
That is really great information for people to have. We have come to the end of this. That hour flew by. I want to thank you so much. Chris, it's been really interesting and great to understand about your office and some of the things that you went through in your time there working for Governor Hogan. And I guess as the last quick question, what's next for you now that the new administration is coming in? And before we wrap up, so where are you heading next?
Geez, Senator, you and my wife both. She's going to hit me in the head with a frying pan if I don't give her some idea of what's coming next. Things are still very busy right now in this office. The governor has used the line "run through the tape." We're in the last. To me, we've rounded third base. We're running for home. We have a lot of issues that we're still dealing with here. One thing is, the orderly transfer of our records over to archives. We have a lot of records here that really tell a great story of what the administration's done. It's important to me and a lot of people over here that we preserve that story for history. We leave that in archives so people can see all the good work we've done. But, you know,
You're not
very,
sending those down to, you're not going to send those down to Mar-a-Lago for
yeah, no, it's first things first is telling people that, you know, we told security, if you see anybody walking out with like large boxes, you know, filled with paper, you know, please let legal counsel's office know. So, but we have a process for getting that over to archives. We're in constant discussions with them about, you know, making sure they get the materials that they're interested in. So that's very busy. We still have, you know, a smattering of judicial appointments to make, and there's going to be a lot of transition issues coming up in short order. We stand by ready and waiting and eager to help the next incoming administration. They're going to have a lot of questions. You know, they're going to be excited. Someone out there is someone who's going to be sitting in this chair, and whoever you are, you're in for a very, very fulfilling and exciting part of your career. I can tell you that. So we're still very busy, and we're going to finish out strong here for the governor. But you know that I still am going to have to figure out somewhere to go come January. And I think what I'll say is one part of this job that I miss is that we don't actually litigate. You know, we rely on the Attorney General's office to do litigating, and I always enjoyed litigating. I loved standing up, making my arguments. I liked writing my motions, writing my briefs. You know, I like the sort of the intrigue of the adversarial process and representing clients in court. I think being in court, you really feel like a true lawyer standing in front of a judge making arguments. So hopefully the fact that I haven't done it for 6 years isn't too disqualifying, but I'm eager to go back out and be a true lawyer again, in the sense of standing in front of judges and representing clients again. So that's my hope.
Great. Well, Chris, great to be with you this morning. And on behalf of the Maryland State Bar Association, thank you so much for taking so much time with us this morning to explain your office and some of the issues you've been working on and are going to continue to. So great to have you this morning. Thank you very much, Senator. I really much enjoyed it. And thank you for hosting and spending your time on these things. It's a great service to everyone in the MSBA, myself included. So thank you. Thank you. All right. And with that, we are finished with our Coffee with Conversation. Shally?
Thank you. Thank you both for this great conversation. And I just wanted to share, we do have a few upcoming sessions already scheduled that you can sign up for through our website. We'll be speaking to Senator Will Smith on November 30th. We'll be speaking to Judge Stacey Mayer on December 7th. And then we'll be speaking to the next state's attorney for Baltimore City, Ivan Bates, on December 14th, and then many more to come in the new calendar year. I also wanted to put in, save the date for everyone for January 24th, which will be our MSBA day, and we will be back in person in Annapolis. So we'll give a wave to you or to your office, Chris, at that point, and we'll convene together and probably do a live session there if Bobby has enough coffee going. So good to see everyone, and please reach out to us with anything else. Have a good morning.
Thank you.